My guest is NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. Commissioner Silver, thanks so much for joining me on Sports Business Radio. It's great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, this is such an exciting week for the NBA. The in-season tournament, we've got the quarterfinals, the semis, and the finals are in Las Vegas. From where you sit, how's this first tournament gone? What's worked well? Where are some areas that could be improved?
It's frankly exceeded expectations so far. I recognize we got a week of competition left, so I'm not going to declare victory till we actually crown the first champion of the NBA Cup, but I'm really pleased by the excitement that we're seeing around the league, mainly from the players and the coaches. We knew that was going to be the most important litmus test, and that is, were the players going to care, were the coaches going to care, were the teams going to get up for these games? And we know that just by watching the competition, but in addition, the fans have responded. Those games are up considerably from similar games last year. Social media chatter has been enormous. In terms of things that withholding judgment on, I get it that in terms of the colorful courts, that we have our critics out there. I happen to be a big proponent of them, not to say that once we get through this round, this iteration of the tournament, we're not opposed to tweaking them going forward. But I like the idea that there's something very visual to signify to fans on television or however they're watching them that these games are different than other games.
For the upcoming broadcast on December 7th, the semifinals, I love this. You're doing a crossover with TNT and ESPN. We're going to see Ernie and Kenny and Shaq and Charles joined by Stephen A. Smith and Michael Wilbon. There's also going to be some crossover with the game broadcasts themselves. Whose idea was this?
Frankly, credit TNT and ESPN, it was theirs. They came together, the leaders of those organizations, our two media partners in the United States, and they said, let's make a big deal about this. I know just from leadership of those organizations, but also the talent. They're all friends. They kind of have a fun competition going back and forth. So we love the idea that they're coming together for this. And I think it signifies it's sort of big event television as well.
All right. Speaking of media partners, NBA media rights, I know this is front and center for you as you continue to have these conversations. Ideally, what are you looking for in the next media rights deal?
We're looking for a few things. I'd say number one is reach. It's still very important that we have the ability to talk to our fans and reach our fans directly. And while somebody might say, well, reach, therefore broadcast television. Broadcast television is a critical component, but broadcast television isn't reaching large swaths of our fan base anymore. And I'm just talking about the United States right now, because for a lot of young fans in particular, broadcast television is in essence just another cable or satellite channel. So I think we need to find ways using technology, digital technology, streaming technology, so that to the extent there are fans out there that consume media through their phones or tablets or whatever other devices, that all our games become accessible to them. At the same time, it's not lost on us that a large portion of America is still watching games or programming in very traditional ways, broadcast television, cable television. So that's similarly important. At the same time, we want to make sure that our games are discoverable, that it's not a maze of broadcast that it requires Googling playoff games to find out where they are. So, and I think technology can solve a lot of those problems, because even if you're on multiple outlets, you can use potentially the NBA.com or the NBA app, as a front door to get into those various services. And then on top of that, I think technological innovation is going to be very important. It's just for particularly our young fans, engagement becomes critically important. And whether that's in various forms of gaming, in some cases that's the gamification of basketball. They're fascinated with the statistics. They're focused on particular players. They're focused on the history of how players have performed in similar situations in the past, or sports betting for that matter. That's not a business we'll be directly in, but we understand there's a large segment of sports bettors out there, large segment of our fan base that wants to engage. In most cases, it's very small dollars, but it's an additional form of engagement. Then we know there's a segment of our fan base that wants to talk to each other. I mean, frankly, the way they do on Twitter or X now or other social media platforms. But there's a discovery issue with those platforms as well. How do you find that NBA community? And what can we do to make that NBA community more accessible so you can find the kinds of content you're interested. And then there's other technological things that we can do to customize our broadcasts. Of course, you want to focus on a particular play or a particular angle, but you may want it in a different language, or it may be that you don't want the traditional play-by-play standard broadcast that we all grew up on. Instead, you want to hear from a social media commentator, or you want to hear from somebody who's a casual fan, or you want to hear from an expert who's explaining the game to you in a different way. I think there's just a world of opportunity when it comes to personalization and customization. So it's a lot of things we're looking for, but I'll just end by saying it's amazing what Disney/ESPN, ABC are doing right now. They're, of course, very focused on next generation technology. Same with Warner Brothers Discovery, through TNT, through Bleacher Report, through other outlets, through Max. They're looking at all those same things. So I'm very encouraged by what we're hearing from our current partners.
Would the NBA ever consider equity in a media partner or a streaming service? I know there's been those conversations out there as well.
Short answer is sure. I mean, I think everything's on the table. We're open to being creative in terms of how we structure a deal. It's likely that it'll be long-term partnerships. And so to the extent that we are incentivized to grow those services with those partners, if they see that as something that makes sense, we're not adverse at all to having an ownership position.
Other than media rights, what are the issues and deals keeping you up at night right now?
Boy, everything keeps me up at night. I'm a nervous guy, but I think international growth is something that I'm always thinking a lot about, and both for the NBA and for the game. And it's a recognition that nothing is preordained, and that as popular as this game is, that consumers, not just the United States, but fans globally, are consuming media in different ways. In many cases, they're not as physically active as a younger generation was. So it's important to us that we keep young people, boys and girls, playing the game of basketball, that we keep them engaged with live games, that becomes an important tradition for them. Again, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily consuming games in the same way as maybe I did when I was younger, in a very passive way, that there's ways to personalize and customize and become directly engaged in the games. But I think it's important that the live game experience be meaningful to them. In addition, we need to take an active role in developing elite players. I mean, what I've seen, I'll just, two contrasts. You have China, where we're the number one sport in terms of popularity, a population of 1.3 billion people, and no Chinese players in the NBA right now. And that's not because top-notch Chinese players aren't leaving the country to play in the NBA. It's because at that level, there aren't Chinese players that can compete right now in the NBA. But then look at a market like Australia with 25 million people. Because of the development system they have there, we have 13 Australian players in the NBA. So I think we need, in a hands-on way, to work with, whether it's with sports organizations, other leagues, our federation, FIBA, to help develop that pipeline of players, because it's not about genetics, it's about development. And you clearly see, and I could also mention Slovenia or Serbia, with great sports cultures and traditions, very small countries that produce NBA players. Again, Australia, a great academy system, a great national team system. And I think that I also think this is just important for well-being of people everywhere. It's not just about basketball. Getting young people to be actively involved in sports. I think, I have a bias towards team sports. Whatever that team sport is, I think you learn how to be a productive member of society, how to work with other people, how to subjugate sort of yourself at times for the greater good. You learn that in business as well. You learn leadership. And on top of that, just what we teach now in our NBA and WNBA programs, it's about nutrition and the importance of sleep, about important values. So anyway, I spend a lot of my time thinking about holistically, how can we develop sports? How can we develop basketball and the NBA on a global basis?
I want to ask you about two specific ownership situations. It's been in the news in the last week. Mark Cuban reportedly selling a majority stake in the Dallas Mavericks. He would remain as governor. Can you give us any clarity on that situation?
On the Dallas situation, as has been reported, Mark has made a decision to sell what appears to be control of the Dallas Mavericks to, essentially to two families. And he has indicated his desire to remain involved with the team, which I think is great news. I mean, if at some point, I'm sure if that deal actually closes, we'll be talking about what Mark has accomplished and the changes he's brought to bear over the league over close to 25 years, or maybe a few years less. But it's been quite remarkable. I mean, he's pushed hard. I know you're close to David Stern. He and David had conflict occasionally, but I think David certainly recognized that it was ultimately very additive to the league. It helps to be pushed by, activist governors who want to see the game improve, want to be innovators and try new things. I've had a great relationship with Mark over the years, and enormous credit to him, for pushing us into the modern era. Came in very much as a technologist. So as I said, with that overall deal, I accept whatever Mark feels ultimately is in his best interest, but I'm encouraged by the fact that early indications are that he would remain involved.
Yeah, I love Mark. He's been on this show. I think the NBA is better with him involved. So nothing but good things to say about him. Adam, I'm based in Portland. I used to work for the Trailblazers. Paul Allen died in 2018. His estate owns the team. A lot of people in Portland, they haven't heard anything from Jody Allen in 5 years, and they're going, what's going on with our team here? Is an ownership group going to buy it at some point? What's going on with Portland? Do you have any clue as to when there may be an ownership change or someone with a vision could take over the franchise?
I have no better sense of precise timing there. I think Paul's directives are clear. His estate, led by Jody Allen as the trustee, are currently in control of the team. I think in fairness to Jody and the basketball people around her, they very much have a vision for building this team, and whether they were controlling it for 5 more years or 10 more years, I think the team is on the right path to developing. And so, some necessary rebuilding. We've seen that in a lot of organizations around the league, but I'm still very optimistic about the future of the Trailblazers.
All right, before I let you go, as you mentioned, our mutual friend and mentor to me, I know a mentor to you, David Stern. What was some of the lessons that he taught you as you worked with him that help you today?
It's tough to condense it to
Sure.
a
Yeah.
couple of lessons, just because, Brian, as you know, I worked directly for David Stern in 5 different jobs for 21 years or so. And I tell sometimes the younger people here, when I started working for David, it was essentially pre-cell phone, pre-internet. And so we were together every day, all day, from early in the day to late in the day, and we traveled together. I started as his assistant, as you know. So there's so much I learned from him. I mean, if I had to condense it into a few nuggets, I'd say, execution in detail was something he was fond of saying. And by that, he meant um, focus on every little detail of everything we do. Um, no issue was too small for David. I mean, you could argue that at some point that doesn't scale, that you also at the same time need to delegate when appropriate. But to the extent he was involved, whether he thought the music was too loud at the party, or the buffet line was too long, or that somebody hadn't thought through where exactly we were giving someone tickets in the arena, or who they were sitting next to, whether they would think that was important. Those are the kinds of things he focused on. But then, so it was detail, but at the same time, he was clearly a big picture guy. And I think there's nothing that's happened in it's been 9 years as commissioner now, that wasn't also on the table when he was here, whether it's the play-in tournament that we put in place 3 years ago, whether it's the in-season tournament that we're talking about now. All those concepts were tossed around when David was commissioner. And I'd say, in essence, maybe the right word is I've inherited all of that as the current commissioner. So everything that this league does now stands on David's shoulders. And just like I think the great players in the league would say today, that without the great players that came before them. So, he was a true visionary. And even my answer to your prior question about what I lose sleep over I mean, he was very focused on technology and how that could change the game. And certainly David's global vision, beginning in 1992 in Barcelona with the Dream Team and David's earlier forays into China and bringing NBA games there to making us truly a global game. I feel in many ways I'm just executing on his vision now. So I think about things he said to me and to others all the time. It's always sort of in the back of my head in virtually everything I do.
I'm sure I'm not the first one to suggest this, and I'm sure you've thought about it too, but it'd be really cool if the in-season tournament became the David Stern Cup at some point.
Honestly, I've thought a lot about that and I've said it out loud. And this is where it's a bit of a conflict at the league. David was so important to the history of this league and in some ways to the future of this league that some people suggested that's not even big enough.
Right.
Because I would do that in a second. And I just want to make sure I'm doing justice to David's legacy. And it's something, as you know, David passed literally right before the pandemic came. And so we were all diverted to focusing on that. And now we're turning our attention back to what is the appropriate tribute to David. But I think it would be a no-brainer in terms of something around the in-season. Honestly, I'm just not sure if that's big enough.
Yeah. Well, look, you're coming up on your 10-year anniversary as NBA commissioner. You have done many innovative things. Congratulations to you. I know the NBA just had their best November attendance in the history of the league. You've gotten this in-season tournament off the ground. You're doing lots of global expansion. Congratulations to you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Commissioner Silver.